Commander Jake Morrison sat in the enormous council chamber and watched the alien delegates argue among themselves. The room was built to intimidate, and it did its job well. Massive pillars reached up to a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. 12 platforms circled the center floor where Jake and his team stood. Each platform held representatives from the elder species of the galaxy. The Zorvathi occupied the highest platform. Their ambassador was a tall creature with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. His name was something humans could not pronounce, so they called him Ambassador Zenther. He looked down at the humans with an expression that Jake had learned to recognize as contempt. Jake had been here for 3 months. 3 long months of meetings and negotiations and barely hidden insults. His team was tired. Lisa Grant stood to his left. She was his diplomatic advisor and the smartest person he had ever worked with. On his right was Daniel Brooks, the security chief who never seemed to relax. Behind them stood 6 other humans, specialists in trade, military affairs, and xenobiology. They all wore the dark blue uniforms of Earth's diplomatic corps. They all looked as tired as Jake felt. The Zorvathi ambassador raised one of his 4 hands, and the chamber fell silent. His voice boomed through translator devices that made his words understandable to every species present. "We have been patient with the humans," Zenther said. "We have listened to their requests and considered their position. Now the Council will present its final terms for peace and galactic citizenship." Jake noticed how Zenthar said final terms. Not proposed terms or suggested terms. Final terms. As if humanity had no choice but to accept. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed maps of space, trade routes, and colony locations. Zenther continued speaking. Humanity will be permitted to maintain colonies in sectors 7, 9, and 13. All other colonial expansion will cease immediately. Human military vessels will be restricted to these same sectors. No more than 50 warships may be maintained in active service. All human technological development will be submitted to Council review before implementation. Human trade will be conducted through Council-approved channels and subject to Council tariffs. These terms are non-negotiable. They represent the price of peace and the privilege of joining the galactic community. The other delegates nodded in agreement. The Marthon, who looked like walking trees, swayed their branches in approval. The Valorians, small gray beings with large eyes, chittered softly to each other. Even the Krillians, who usually stayed neutral in council politics, seemed to accept the terms without question. Lisa leaned close to Jake and whispered, "They are asking us to give up our sovereignty." Jake nodded slowly. He had expected something like this, but hearing it stated so bluntly still made his blood run cold. 50 warships to defend dozens of colonies spread across 3 sectors. Council oversight of human technology meant Earth's military and industrial secrets would be exposed. Trade restrictions would cripple the human economy. These were not terms of peace. They were terms of surrender. "The Council awaits your response," Zenther said. "Though we understand you may need time to consult with your government, we are prepared to be generous. You may have 48 hours to accept these terms. 48 hours. Not to negotiate, not to propose alternatives. Just to accept." Jake looked at his team. Lisa's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger. Daniel's hand rested near his sidearm, though no weapons would help them here. The other team members looked shocked and defeated. Jake had been a military commander before he became a diplomat. He had fought in the border wars against pirates and separatist groups. He had led men and women into combat and brought most of them home alive. He knew when he was being bullied, and he knew when retreat was the smart option. But he also knew when standing your ground was the only option that mattered. He stepped forward, and every eye in the chamber turned to him. The translator device on his collar would carry his words to every species present. "Ambassador Zenthor," Jake said in a calm voice, "on behalf of humanity and the government of Earth, I want to thank you and the Council for your time these past 3 months." Zenthor's expression shifted slightly. He had not expected thanks. Jake continued. "We came here seeking dialogue and mutual understanding. We hope to find common ground with the elder species of the galaxy. We believe that peaceful coexistence was possible between equals. Equals, Zenthar interrupted. Humanity is barely 3 generations into space travel. You have not earned equality with species who have traveled the stars for millennia.
Perhaps not,
Jake said. But we have earned the right to govern ourselves. We have earned the right to defend our people and expand according to our own choices. We have earned the right to develop our technology without outside interference. These are not privileges granted by a council. These are fundamental rights of any sovereign species. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates from a dozen species began talking at once. Zenthar raised all 4 arms, demanding silence. You reject the council's generous terms? He asked. We do, Jake said simply. Earth recognizes no authority over humanity except humanity itself. Your terms are unacceptable. Therefore, we respectfully decline your offer, and this delegation will be returning to Earth immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. Lisa stared at Jake with wide eyes. Daniel actually smiled. The other team members looked uncertain, but stood straighter. Zenthar's skin color shifted to a darker shade of blue. You cannot simply walk away from these negotiations, he said. We can, and we are, Jake replied. Humanity does not seek conflict with the Council or any of its member species. We hope that peaceful relations will be possible in the future. But we will not surrender our sovereignty as the price of your approval. If that means we must stand alone, then we will stand alone. Jake turned to his team. Pack up. We leave within the hour. This is madness, Zenthar shouted. No species has ever refused the Council's terms. No species has ever walked away from the table. Jake turned back to face the Zorvathi ambassador. Then I guess there is a first time for everything, he said. Humanity wishes the Council well. Perhaps when you are ready to treat us as equals rather than subjects, we can talk again. He walked toward the chamber exit, and his team followed without hesitation. Behind them, the council chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates were shouting in a dozen languages. Zenthar was demanding they return immediately. Other species were asking what this meant and what they should do. Jake did not look back. He kept walking until they reached their shuttle bay. Only when they were sealed inside their ship did he allow himself to breathe deeply. That was either the bravest thing I have ever seen, Lisa said, or the most foolish. Maybe both, Jake admitted. But humanity will not beg for scraps from the Council's table. We chart our own course, or we chart nothing at all. Daniel started the launch sequence. Earth is going to lose its mind when we get home. Let them, Jake said. It's time the galaxy learned something about humans. We do not kneel. The shuttle lifted off from the Council station and turned toward home. Behind them, 12 elder species tried to understand what had just happened. No one walked away from the Council. No one refused their terms. But the humans had done exactly that, and now everything was about to change. President Helen Carter stood before the United Earth Assembly and faced 500 representatives from every nation on the planet. The assembly hall was packed beyond capacity. News of the walkout had reached Earth 2 days ago, and the entire world had been in an uproar ever since. Some called Jake Morrison a hero. Others called him a reckless fool who had doomed humanity to war. Helen knew she had to calm the storm and make Earth's position clear. Members of the assembly, she began. Commander Morrison acted on my direct orders. The walkout was not a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate choice made after careful consideration of the Council's terms. The hall erupted in shouting. Representatives demanded explanations. Some wanted Morrison arrested. Others wanted an immediate military mobilization. Helen waited for the noise to die down. The Council demanded we surrender our sovereignty, she continued. They wanted control of our military, our technology, and our expansion into space. They offered us the privilege of kneeling in exchange for their protection. I want to be clear about something. Earth does not kneel. Humanity does not beg. We came from a world where we had to fight for every achievement. We built our civilization through determination and sacrifice. We will not throw that away because ancient aliens think we should know our place. A representative from the European sector stood up. Madam President, what if the Council retaliates? What if they send their fleets against our colonies? Helen had expected this question. Then we defend ourselves. Our military is smaller than the Council's combined forces, but we are not helpless. We have advantages they do not expect. Our ships are faster. Our weapons are more advanced than they realize. Our people have something that 3 centuries of peace has taken from the Council species. We remember how to fight. Another representative spoke up. Are we really prepared to stand alone against the entire galaxy? We are not alone, Helen said. Intelligence reports S. Oogjust several Council species are unhappy with Zorvathi dominance. The Council is not as unified as they want us to believe. But even if we were alone, the answer would be the same. Freedom is not negotiable. Sovereignty is not for sale. We will find allies among the stars, or we will stand by ourselves. Either way, we stand. The Assembly voted 3 hours later. The result was overwhelming. Earth would continue its expansion. Human colonies would be defended. The Council's authority was not recognized. Humanity would seek peaceful relations with any species that approached them as equals, but would not submit to anyone's rule. 5,000 light-years away. The Council station was in chaos. Ambassador Zenther called emergency session after emergency session, but nothing was getting done. The Zorvathi wanted immediate military action. They proposed sending a fleet to blockade Earth and force humanity to negotiate. The Marthon agreed reluctantly. The Valorians wanted economic sanctions first. The Krillians refused to support any military action at all. This is unacceptable, Zenther shouted during one heated session. A species of primitives has insulted this council and walked away from our authority. If we do nothing, others will follow their example. The entire structure of galactic civilization is at risk. A Krillian delegate named Vorath spoke in a calm voice. Perhaps the structure you speak of deserves to be at risk. The Council has maintained peace through intimidation for 300 years. Every younger species accepts our terms because they fear the alternative. But what happens when a species is not afraid? What happens when they call our bluff? Bluff. Zenther's skin turned dark purple with rage. The Council's military power is not a bluff. We have the ships and the weapons to enforce our will. Do we? Vorath asked. When was the last time the Council fought a real war? When was the last time our crews saw combat? The humans have been fighting each other in various threats for their entire history. Their soldiers have actual experience. Their commanders know how to win battles. Do ours? The question hung in the air like a weight. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The truth was that most Council species had not fought a serious war in living memory. Their fleets were large and impressive, but untested. Military service had become ceremonial. Tactics and strategy were taught from old books rather than learned through experience. Zenther tried a different approach. We can impose economic sanctions. Cut off trade with human colonies. Blockade their supply routes. Force them to accept our terms through economic pressure. A Valorian delegate checked her datapad. Our intelligence reports show that human merchant vessels have already rerouted their supply chains. They anticipated sanctions and prepared alternatives. They have been trading with independent colonies and non-council species for months. Our economic leverage is minimal at best. Zenthor slammed one of his 4 fists on the console. Then we must make an example. Send a fleet to one of their colonies. Show them we are serious. And if they fight back? Vorath asked. If they destroy some of our ships, what then? Do we escalate to a full war? Are we prepared for the casualties that would result? Are we prepared to explain to our people why we are spending lives and resources to force another species into submission? The session ended with no decisions made. Zenthar returned to his private quarters and contacted the Zorvathi High Command. If the Council would not act decisively, then the Zorvathi would act alone. They would send a fleet to one of the human colonies and force the primitives to back down. Surely when humans saw the size of a Zorvathi war fleet, they would realize resistance was futile. Admiral Kevin Hayes received the intelligence report 3 days after the Assembly vote. His office was deep inside Earth's military headquarters in Geneva. The walls were covered with star maps and fleet disposition charts. Kevin had been preparing for this moment since Jake Morrison first sent word of the Council's demands. "They are sending a fleet to New Austin," his intelligence officer reported. "Zorvathi warships led by their War Master Keller. 43 vessels, including their flagship Infinite Majesty. They will arrive in 2 weeks." Kevin studied the map. New Austin was one of humanity's newer colonies. Only 15,000 people lived there. The defense force consisted of 3 frigates and 1 destroyer under the command of Captain Amy Chen. It was not much to face 43 enemy ships. "Get me Captain Chen on the secure channel," Kevin ordered, "and send orders to the 5th Fleet. I want them in position to support New Austin, but staying out of sensor range. If this turns into a shooting war, we will be ready." The intelligence officer hesitated. "Sir, should we evacuate the colony? 43 ships against 4 is not a fight we can win." Kevin smiled grimly. "We are not trying to win a fight. We are trying to win a standoff. The Zorvathi think we will panic and run when we see their fleet. They think we will beg for mercy. They are about to learn that humans do not scare easily." Back on the Council station, other species were watching the situation develop with great interest. The Valorians quietly contacted their military commanders and told them to stay out of any conflict between humans and Zorvathi. The Marthon did the same. Even some of the species that had voted for sanctions were having second thoughts. Young Krillian analyst named Sorith prepared a report for Vorith. The report detailed everything they knew about human military capabilities. It made for disturbing reading. Human ships were smaller than Council vessels, but carried twice the firepower. Human crews trained constantly for combat situations. Human tactics emphasized speed and aggression over the defensive formations the Council preferred. Most concerning was human psychology. Every species the Council had ever dealt with backed down when threatened. Humans seemed to do the opposite. When threatened, they became more dangerous. Vorath read the report and felt a chill run through his body. He had suspected the Council was making a mistake, but now he was certain. The Zorvathi were about to poke a sleeping predator, and they had no idea what would happen when it woke up. On Earth. Helen Carter gave one more speech before the crisis reached its peak. "The Zorvathi are sending ships to threaten our people. They expect us to surrender. They expect us to abandon our colony and accept their authority. I have one message for the Zorvathi and the entire Council. We will not abandon our people. We will not surrender our rights. If they want a war, then they will get one. But we will not fire the first shot. Let history record that humans offered peace, and the Council chose intimidation. Whatever happens next is on them." The message was broadcast across every human colony and transmitted toward the Council station. It would take weeks to arrive, but everyone would eventually hear it. Humanity had drawn a line in space and dared the Council to cross it. Captain Amy Chen stood on the bridge of her destroyer, the Valiant, and watched the sensor display with careful attention. The Zorvathi fleet had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Austin system. 43 warships arranged in a formation designed to intimidate. At the center was the Infinite Majesty, a massive battleship that dwarfed any human vessel. The ship's hull was decorated with symbols of Zorvathi military victories dating back 1,000 years. "They are hailing us," her communications officer reported. "Put them through," Amy said. She kept her voice calm even though her heart was racing. This was the moment that would determine whether humanity's bold stance would hold or crumble. The view screen activated and showed War Master Keller. He was even larger than Ambassador Zenthor, with scars across his blue-gray skin that spoke of ancient battles. His forearms were decorated with military honors, and his expression radiated absolute confidence. "Human vessel," Keller said. "I am War Master Keller of the Zorvathi Armada. By order of the Galactic Council, this colony is established in violation of Council territorial agreements. You will evacuate all personnel within 24 hours. Failure to comply will result in the use of force." Amy took a moment before responding. Her 3 frigates, the Ranger, the Guardian, and the Sentinel, had taken positions flanking the Valiant. 4 ships against 43. The odds were absurd, but Amy had her orders, and more importantly, she had her convictions. War Master Keller, she replied. I am Captain Amy Chen of the Earth Defense Force. New Austin is a legally established human colony on an unclaimed world. We recognize no council authority over human expansion. We will not be evacuating. Keller's expression shifted to something between surprise and amusement. You have 4 small ships. I have 43 warships, including the most powerful battleship in this sector. You cannot seriously believe you can resist. We do not seek conflict, Amy said carefully, but we will defend our people and our territory. Before you proceed, I must ask a direct question. Has the Galactic Council officially declared war on humanity? The question seemed to catch Keller off guard. His confidence wavered slightly. The Council has authorized enforcement action. That is not the same as a declaration of war, Amy pointed out. So let me be clear. If you open fire on this colony or our vessels, it will be considered an act of war. Earth will respond accordingly. Is the Zorovathi Empire prepared to go to war with humanity? Keller leaned back in his command chair. This was not going as he expected. Young species always backed down when faced with overwhelming force. They begged for mercy or tried to negotiate. They did not ask questions about formal declarations of war. You are bluffing, Keller said. Your entire fleet could not stand against the forces I command right now. Amy nodded. You are probably right about that. But war is not decided by a single battle. If you destroy this colony and these 4 ships, what happens next? Earth has 50 more warships, and they will all come looking for you. Our shipyards will build more. Our people will demand revenge. The Zorovathi Empire will be at war with a species that has nothing to lose and everything to prove. Is that what your government wants? Keller did not answer immediately. He had been ordered to intimidate the humans into retreating. Simple show of force followed by compliance. No one had prepared him for a captain who spoke of revenge and prolonged conflict with such calm certainty. I will demonstrate our capabilities, Keller said finally. Perhaps then you will see reason. The Zorovathi fleet began performing targeting locks on the human ships. Weapon systems activated across 43 vessels. The display was meant to terrify. Amy watched the tactical screen light up with targeting indicators and allowed herself a small smile. Weapons, she said quietly to her crew. Target their flagship and the 17 ships in the first formation line. Lock and confirm, but do not fire unless I give the order. Her weapons officer worked quickly. Within seconds, the Valiant's targeting systems had locked onto 18 Zorovathi vessels simultaneously. The 3 frigates did the same, each taking multiple targets. The human ships had fewer weapons, but their targeting systems were far more advanced than anything the Zorovathi possessed. Targets locked, her weapons officer reported. We have firing solutions on all designated vessels. Amy opened the channel to Keller again. War Master, you should check your threat indicators. We have locked weapons on your flagship and 17 other ships in your fleet. Our missiles are armed and ready to fire. Now let me ask you again. Do you want to start a war today? Keller's screen flickered as his tactical officer reported the human targeting locks. The confidence in his expression vanished completely. The humans had not just locked weapons on a few targets. They had achieved multiple simultaneous locks faster than Zorovathi sensors could track. That kind of targeting capability was not supposed to exist in such small ships. You would not dare fire on this fleet, Keller said, but his voice lacked conviction. Try me, Amy replied simply. I have orders to defend this colony by any means necessary. If you fire first, we will return fire, and a lot of your people will die before you destroy us. Then Earth will send more ships and more after that. Or you can withdraw and report to the Council that humans are serious about defending their territory. Your choice. The bridge of the infinite majesty was in chaos. Keller's tactical officers were arguing about what to do. His weapons officer reported that the human targeting systems were more sophisticated than their intelligence had suggested. His communications officer was receiving urgent messages from the Council station demanding updates. Keller himself was frozen between pride and pragmatism. On the Council station, the emergency session was watching the standoff through live feeds. Zenther was demanding that Keller open fire immediately. Vorath was warning that any attack would lead to disaster. The Valorians were calling for Keller to withdraw. The Marthan were silent and watching. Hours passed, and the standoff continued. Neither side fired. Neither side backed down. Amy kept her crew at battle stations and maintained targeting locks on the Zorvathi ships. Keller kept his fleet in position but did not give the order to attack. Both commanders understood that the first shot would change everything. Finally, after 6 hours of tension, Keller received new orders from the Zorvathi High Command. The orders were carefully worded to avoid the appearance of retreat. The fleet was to reposition to a strategic holding pattern. The situation was to be monitored and reported. Further action would be determined after consultation with the full council. In other words, withdraw, but make it look deliberate. Keller opened the channel one last time. Captain Chen, the Zorvathi fleet, will be repositioning. However, be aware that this matter is not settled. The council will determine the appropriate response to your illegal colonization. Understood, Amy said. New Austin will remain where it is. We will continue to defend our territory. I suggest the council consider whether forcing this issue is worth the cost. The Zorvathi fleet began moving away from New Austin. They did not retreat quickly or show any signs of panic. They moved with military precision and maintained formation. But they were leaving, and everyone watching knew what that meant. On Earth. Admiral Kevin Hayes allowed himself to relax for the first time in days. The Fifth Fleet had been ready to jump into the system if shooting started. Now they could stand down. Amy Chen had done exactly what he hoped she would do. She had called the bluff, and the Zorvathi had blinked first. President Helen Carter addressed Earth once more. Today proved what we have always known. Humanity will not be bullied. We offered the Zorvathi a choice between peace and conflict. They chose to test our resolve and learned that we meant every word. The Council must now decide whether they want war with a species that refuses to surrender. I believe they will choose differently. On the Council station, Zenther was furious but powerless. The Zorvathi had been humiliated. Other species were openly questioning whether the Council's intimidation tactics still worked. Vorath prepared a new report, analyzing what had happened. The conclusion was simple and terrifying for the Old Order. The Council's power had always been based on the belief that resistance was futile. The humans had shattered that belief in one. 6 hours standoff, Amy remained on the bridge of the Valiant and watched the Zorvathi fleet disappear from her sensors. Her hands were shaking slightly now that the crisis had passed. Her executive officer approached quietly. "Captain, that was either brilliant or insane," he said. "Probably both," Amy admitted. "But it worked. They were not prepared to die for the Council's pride. Now the real question is what happens next. What happened next would reshape the entire galaxy, but that was a problem for politicians and diplomats. Amy had done her part. She had stood her ground and proven that humans meant what they said. Sometimes that was all it took to change history. The failure at New Austin changed everything. Within days, human ships began moving through space with complete disregard for Council boundaries. Earth merchant vessels traveled wherever they wanted, and when Council patrol ships tried to intercept them, the humans simply outran them. It was embarrassing for the Council, and everyone in the galaxy was watching. Species that had always followed Council rules were now questioning whether those rules had any real power behind them. The Council tried to establish a blockade around human space. They positioned ships at key jump points and declared that any human vessel attempting to pass would be detained. The first human freighter to reach the blockade simply flew past the Council ships. When the Council vessels tried to pursue, the human ship jumped too faster than light speed before they could get close. The Council fleet was left looking foolish, and the blockade became a joke. Ambassador, Zenther called for harsher measures, but his influence was weakening. The Zorvathi had promised quick results and delivered only humiliation. Other Council species were no longer willing to follow Zorvathi leadership without question. The Krillians openly mocked the failed blockade. The Valorians proposed alternative approaches. Even the Marthon, usually loyal allies of the Zorvathi, were expressing doubts. Jake Morrison returned to the Council station, but not to negotiate surrender. He came with a different message entirely. When he entered the council chamber this time, there was no platform for him to stand on. He stood on the main floor as an equal, and the symbolism was not lost on anyone present. Members of the council, Jake began. Earth sent me here to make our position clear one final time. Humanity does not want war. We gain nothing from conflict with your species, but we will not accept subjugation in exchange for peace. The choice before you is simple. You can continue trying to enforce rules we do not recognize and waste resources on a conflict you cannot win. Or you can accept a new reality. Zenthor interrupted immediately. The Council does not negotiate with species that defy our authority. You walked away from these talks once. We will not permit such disrespect again. Jake turned to face the Zorvathi ambassador directly. With respect, you have no power to permit or prevent anything we choose to do. Your fleets cannot catch our ships. Your blockades are useless. Your threats are empty. The only question that matters is whether you are wise enough to recognize this truth. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Zenthor was shouting about human arrogance. Several other delegates were calling for Jake to be removed from the station. But some delegates remained silent and thoughtful. Vorath of the Krillians watched Jake with what might have been approval. The Valorian delegate was taking notes. A few others were clearly reconsidering their positions. Jake waited for the noise to die down, then continued. Earth is willing to discuss mutual defense agreements. We are willing to establish trade relationships. We are willing to cooperate on exploration and scientific research. But these discussions will end between equals. We will not bow to council authority. We will not limit our expansion. We will not surrender our sovereignty. If you can accept these terms, then we can build something better than the old system. If you cannot accept them, then we will simply go our separate ways. A Valorian delegate named Leora spoke up. What you propose would require fundamental changes to council structure. For 300 years, the council has maintained order through a clear hierarchy. Younger species accept guidance from elder species. This system has prevented wars and maintained stability. Did it? Jake asked. Or has it simply prevented younger species from challenging older ones? You call it stability, but others might call it stagnation. How many innovations have been suppressed because they threatened the established order? How many species have accepted bad deals because they had no choice? Your system maintains peace through intimidation, and that only works until someone refuses to be intimidated. Voreth stood from his platform. The human speaks uncomfortable truths. The council has grown complacent. We assumed our power would never be challenged, because it never has been before. But power that is never tested becomes hollow. Perhaps it is time to consider whether the old ways serve us as well as we believe. This is madness, Zenthar shouted. If we allow humanity to dictate terms, then every species will demand the same treatment. The council will collapse. Then let it collapse, Voreth said calmly, and let us build something better from the ruins. A true alliance of equals rather than a hierarchy maintained through fear. The debate continued for hours. Younger council species began speaking up in support of reforms. They had been silent for generations, but now they saw an opportunity. The humans had proven that the council could be defied. If humans could stand alone, then perhaps other species could as well. The old order was cracking, and everyone could see it happening. Lisa Grant worked behind the scenes during the debates. She met privately with delegates from 24 species. Her message was consistent and simple. Humanity was not trying to destroy the council, but to transform it. A reformed council based on mutual respect rather than forced submission would be stronger and more stable. Species that joined willingly would be more reliable allies than species that joined because they had no choice. She found surprising support among the younger council members. The Valorians were tired of Zorvathi dominance. The Marthon wanted more influence in council decisions. Several smaller species saw the chaos as a chance to gain power they had never possessed before. Lisa carefully built a coalition of species willing to support major reforms. The Zorvathi tried to maintain control, but their grip was slipping. Zenthor called for unity among the elder species, but found less support than expected. The Krillians refused to back any military action against humans. The Valorians proposed a committee to study council reforms. Even some Zorvathi military commanders were quietly suggesting that continued conflict with humanity was unwise. Jake met privately with Vorith in a small conference room away from the main council chambers. The Krillian delegate brought tea, a ritual his species used to indicate peaceful intentions. "You have done something remarkable," Vorith said. "You have broken a system that has existed for 3 centuries. I am not sure whether to thank you or curse you." "Why would you thank me?" Jake asked. "Because the old system was dying anyway," Vorith explained. "It would have collapsed eventually under its own weight. You simply accelerated the process. Now we have a chance to build something better before everything falls apart completely. And why would you curse me?" Vorath smiled, a strange expression on his alien features. "Because change is painful, even when it is necessary. Many species will resist. Some will fight to preserve the old ways. The transition will not be peaceful or easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Jake said. "But the alternative is worse. A system based on domination and fear cannot last forever. Better to reform it now than wait for it to collapse catastrophically." They talked for 2 more hours about what a reformed council might look like. Vorath had been thinking about this for years, but never had the political capital to push for changes. Now the situation gave him an opening. He and Jake began drafting a proposal that would reshape galactic governance. The proposal called for a new council, structure where every member species had equal voting rights regardless of age or size. The council's role would shift from ruling authority to coordinating body. Mutual defense would be voluntary rather than mandatory. Trade would be free rather than controlled. Technology sharing would be encouraged but not required. Most importantly, every species would retain complete sovereignty over their own territory and decisions. It was a radical departure from the old system, and many species would hate it. But it was also the only way forward that did not lead to continued conflict. Jake and Voreth presented the proposal to selected delegates, engaged reactions. The responses were mixed, but enough species showed interest to suggest the idea might gain traction. Meanwhile, Admiral Kevin Hayes was preparing for the possibility that diplomacy would fail. Earth's shipyards were working around the clock building new vessels. Defensive positions around human colonies were being reinforced. Alliances were being quietly formed with independent species outside council control. If the council rejected reform and chose war, then humanity would be ready. President Helen Carter received daily briefings on both diplomatic and military preparations. She knew the next few weeks would determine humanity's future in the galaxy. Either the council would accept changes and humanity would have peaceful relations with the galaxy's civilizations, or the council would fracture and humanity would need to navigate a much more dangerous and chaotic universe. There was no middle ground anymore. The old system was dying and something new would take its place. The only question was whether that transition would happen peacefully or through conflict. Jake stood before the council one more time. "We have a proposal," he said. "A way forward that protects everyone's interests while acknowledging new realities. I ask that you consider it carefully before making any final decisions. The galaxy is changing whether you like it or not. You can change with it or be left behind." He submitted the formal proposal and waited to see how the galaxy would respond. The debate over the reform proposal lasted 6 weeks. During that time, the council chamber saw more arguments and disagreements than it had witnessed in the previous 50 years combined. The Zorvathi fought against every change and tried to maintain the old system. Zenther gave passionate speeches about tradition and order and the dangers of allowing younger species to much power. But his words fell on increasingly deaf ears. Too many species had seen the weakness behind the council's authority. They could not unsee it. The Valorians were the first major species to formally support the human proposal. Leora stood before the council and explained her reasoning in calm, measured tones. The old system had served its purpose, but times were changing. Species like humanity would keep appearing, and each time the council would face the same crisis. Better to adapt now and create a structure that could accommodate strong, independent species, rather than forcing every new arrival into submission. The Marthan followed 2 days later. Their representative, A being named Trendle, who spoke through rustling leaves, acknowledged that the Marthan had benefited from the old system. But they also recognized that clinging to outdated structures would eventually lead to violence. The reform proposal offered a path to peace that respected everyone's sovereignty. That was worth supporting, even if it meant giving up some traditional privileges. One by one, other species announced their positions. The smaller council members mostly supported reform because it gave them more influence than they had ever possessed. Several mid-tier species joined the coalition because they were tired of Zorbathai dominance. Even some of the elder species began to waver as they realized the old order was finished whether they voted for reform or not. The Zorbathai stood almost alone in opposition. Zenthar made increasingly desperate arguments, but he was fighting a losing battle. The mathematics were simple. If the vote happened today, reform would pass by a significant margin. The only question was whether the Zorbathai would accept the result or try to maintain the old system through force. Vorath approached. Jake, during a recess in the debates, the Krillian looked tired but satisfied. "We are going to win," he said quietly. "The votes are there. In 3 days, the Council will ratify the Treaty of New Geneva, and everything will change." "Will the Zorbathai accept it?" Jake asked. That was the question keeping him awake at night. A treaty meant nothing if one of the most powerful species refused to honor it. "They will have no choice," Vorath said. "If they reject the treaty, they stand alone. Most of their traditional allies have already shifted to supporting reform. The Zorbathai are pragmatic enough to understand that isolation serves no one. They will protest and complain and try to water down the reforms, but they will ultimately accept the new reality." Vorath was right. 3 days later, the Council voted on the Treaty of New Geneva. The result was 73 species in favor and only 5 opposed. The Zorbathai voted against it, along with 4 small species that were economically dependent on tea. But the overwhelming majority supported the reforms, and that made them official galactic law. The treaty fundamentally restructured the Council. Every member species received equal voting rights regardless of their age or power. The Council's authority shifted from command to coordination. Military alliances became voluntary. Trade restrictions were eliminated. Technology sharing was encouraged, but not mandated. Most importantly, every species retained complete sovereignty over its territory and internal affairs. The Council could make recommendations, but could not enforce them without unanimous consent. Humanity was offered a seat on the Reformed Council with full voting rights. President Helen Carter accepted on behalf of Earth. She traveled to the Council station personally for the signing ceremony. Jake Morrison stood beside her as they put humanity's official seal on the treaty document. "We did not want to destroy the old system," Helen said during her acceptance speech. "We simply refused to surrender our freedom as the price of joining it. I am grateful that so many species chose adaptation over confrontation. The new Council will be stronger because it is based on respect rather than fear. Humanity looks forward to working with all member species as equals and partners." Zenthar attended the ceremony, but said nothing. His body language radiated displeasure, but he did not protest or cause disruptions. The Zorbathai had lost their dominant position, and there was nothing he could do to change that reality. Some of his aides whispered about resistance or sabotage, but Zenthar was too experienced to waste resources on lost causes. The old order was gone, and the Zorbathai would need to find their place in the new one. Jake Morrison retired from diplomatic service 2 months after the treaty was ratified. He had accomplished what he set out to do, and now younger diplomats could handle the ongoing work of building relationships under the new system. He returned to Earth and bought a small house in the mountains where he could see stars every night. Lisa Grant visited him there occasionally, and they would talk about the strange path that had led them to reshape galactic civilization. "Do you think it will last?" Lisa asked during one visit. "The new Council faces so many challenges. Old grudges do not disappear just because we signed a treaty. Nothing lasts forever," Jake admitted. "But we built something better than what existed before. That is all anyone can really do." Each generation builds on what came before and tries to improve it. Our part is done. Others will carry it forward. Admiral Kevin Hayes remained in command of Earth's defense forces. The treaty had brought peace, but he knew better than to let his guard down completely. He continued building ships and training crews because military readiness was the foundation of lasting peace. Other species respected strength, and humanity needed to remain strong if they wanted to be treated as equals. The new council held its first session under reformed rules 3 months after the treaty signing. The differences were immediately obvious. Debates were more heated because every species could speak freely without fearing retaliation from elder members. Votes were less predictable because traditional power blocks had fractured. Decisions took longer to reach because building consensus among equals was harder than following orders from above. But the decisions that emerged were better and more widely supported than the old. Top-down mandates had ever been. Captain Amy Chen received a promotion to admiral and was given command of a joint task force. Her ships included vessels from 7 different species, including 1 Krillian cruiser and 2 Valorian frigates. Their mission was to explore uncharted space beyond Council territory. It was dangerous work, but also exciting. Amy stood on the bridge of her new flagship and watched her mixed crew work together with surprising efficiency. "Admiral, we are ready to jump to the target coordinates," her executive officer reported. He was a Valorian named Court, who had trained on Earth for 6 months to learn human command procedures. "Take us in," Amy ordered. The fleet jumped 2 faster than light speed and left known space behind. This was what the new council made possible. Species working together by choice rather than obligation. Exploring the unknown as partners rather than rivals. President Helen Carter gave one final address about the changes that had transformed humanity's place in the galaxy. 6 months ago, we walked away from peace talks because the terms were unacceptable. Some called that decision reckless. Some said we were doomed to fail. But we understood something fundamental about our species. Humans do not thrive by accepting someone else's definition of our worth. We thrive by standing up for ourselves and refusing to be diminished. She continued, "The galaxy has changed because we refuse to change who we are." Other species saw our determination and realized they could be equally strong. The old council maintained order through fear, but the new council maintains it through mutual respect. That is a better foundation, and it will create a better future for everyone. Years later, historians from dozens of species would study this period. They called it the Great Reformation and debated exactly why it happened when it did. Some credited human stubbornness. Others pointed to the inevitable decay of the old system. Most agreed it was a combination of factors that came together at exactly the right moment to force change, but those who were there knew the simple truth. Change happened because one species looked at an unfair system and said no, because one commander walked away from bad terms rather than accepting them, because one captain stood her ground against overwhelming odds, it's because ordinary people made difficult choices and refused to compromise on what mattered most. The galaxy was not perfect after the reforms. There were still conflicts and disagreements and problems that needed solving, but it was better than it had been before. Species related to each other as equals rather than masters and subjects. Decisions were made through genuine negotiation rather than intimidation. The future was uncertain, but it belonged to everyone rather than just the oldest and strongest. Jake Morrison watched news reports about the joint exploration missions and felt satisfied. He had not sought glory or recognition. He had simply done what needed doing and trusted that others would carry the work forward. Now young officers from Earth served alongside crew members from a dozen species. They explored together and learned from each other and built relationships that would shape the galaxy for generations. On quiet nights, Jake would sit on his porch and look at the stars. Somewhere up there, humans were walking among aliens as equals. They were building things and exploring places and creating a future no one could have imagined a year ago. All because they had refused to kneel. All because they understood that freedom was not negotiable and sovereignty was not for sale. The galaxy had learned something about humanity during those tense months. Humans walked their own path and no force in the universe could make them do otherwise.